Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey everybody, this is part 2 of my interview with Roland Achenjang. If you didn't catch part 1, go back and catch that. In part 2, we're going to talk about his book, who we are and why we're here. And in part 1, we talked about Roland's life and the experiences that led him to writing the book. So I hope you enjoy this. Catch you later. That's great. So what I want to do, what I want to do now, Roland, I'm going to transition to talking about your book. I think this is a good point because I think this is kind of where your book kind of comes up in your life. And so tell me about the book, the title of the book, and what it's about.
So the book is titled Who and Why You Are, All You Need to Remember. And the book is, in my best attempt, a remembrance or a documentation of everything I remembered right after my spiritual awakening or in the moment of my spiritual awakening. And it's kind of laid out in a step-by-step sequence. Each chapter builds on itself. Mm-hmm. To explain our earth life experience, to help you remember like who you truly are in your most fundamental essence, right? You're this infinite being, a unique expression of the all, having a temporary experience here on earth, designed to help you remember this about who you are, and then also help this all, this what I call consciousness, this intelligence that is self-aware and self-sustaining and always existent, get this, know itself better. That's it. That's a very big combination, or a nice way to kind of put all of this together, or like the entire book. And interestingly enough, that same week after my awakening, one morning I get up and I can't sleep, and I get this message again to grab a pen and a book, and I do. And I start auto writing basically a couple of chapters, and I write what became eventually the chapters of the book. Mm-hmm. And the book, I did my best, right, to write it, to encapsulate that moment and all the lessons and all what I remembered. That again basically explains like who each and every single one of us truly is. And how brave we are, literally how infinitely brave we are to come to this planet and experience life like we currently do, and why we're doing this. And in so doing, the idea is, okay, now that you're aware of this, what are you going to do with the information? How is that going to help you or empowered? That seems like, okay, I actually am contributing to the entire experience in the way that I consciously want to. Right?
Yeah.
And
I have to tell you, I just got your book like a week and a half ago. It usually takes me a month to get through a book. I got through it in about a week. I've discovered this thing that's changed my life, that my phone will actually read my Kindle books to me, so I can listen to it when I'm walking. So I listened to it while I was walking, but you know, as I've read so many books about people that have near-death experiences, people who had spiritually transformative, experiences, and there's so many things in common, but everybody tells a story a little bit differently. And your book was really, I found it fascinating. There were a lot of things about it that were unique, even though it's a common, we have a common thing that we're here for. And one of the things right off the bat that really grabbed me, you talked about, we all hear that we forget when we come here. I think a lot of us really know that. But you talked about this necessary feeling of abandonment. And that really resonated with me because I remember when I was about 8 years old, and I was lying in my bed and I could not sleep because I'm like, why am I here by myself? And I realized that my parents were separate from me and my brother was separate from me. And that when one day we wouldn't be together, I stayed awake all night long because I felt abandoned. I've never heard anybody talk about that feeling before.
Yeah. So, no, thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. And thanks for the nice words you said about the book, too. Um, and abandonment, very important aspect of being able to experience life on this planet. And so, what I remembered was when you come here, right? Part of that agreement with consciousness, with sources, okay, if you can imagine the conversation, to me, it went something like this. All right, whatever my soul name is, I'll call it Roland, but it probably isn't Roland. Well, it's definitely not Roland. As consciousness says, all right, Roland, you've rested from your previous lifetimes, etc. Now we need you to learn new lessons. Are you ready? And you're like, yes, I'm ready. And they go, all right, go ahead, and you're going to pick a family. You're going to learn these lessons. And when you incarnate on Earth, the number one lesson you really have to learn to overcome, the number one way for those lessons to become part of your life, it's through the experience of fear. And you can't experience fear anywhere else like you do on this planet unless you feel like you're abandoned, like you're alone. Fear comes in when you don't feel like you're safe or
Mm.
connected to something. And so the whole idea of abandonment is another way to basically explain the illusion of separation or the illusion of being separate from everything as soon as you incarnate on this planet or when you incarnate on this planet.
Mm.
Now, they say that people tell you that that happens between the ages of 2 and 7, usually when you go through that separation or you become aware of that abandonment. But yes, and I like the word abandonment because it just definitely encapsulates, all right, you've been left to fend for yourself.
Yeah.
And at some point, as an adult, while growing up, even as a kid, you start to speak as if you've been abandoned. You start to claim things as yours. This is mine, right? This is mine. These are my beliefs. These are my truths. I have siblings. And then all of a sudden, I hear this. I feel abandoned. Where is my tribe who believes that Jesus Christ was the only child and didn't have
Mm-hmm.
siblings?
Mm-hmm.
And so this abandonment allows you now to start making sense of the earth life reality, but not the real reality, the illusionary reality, because you aren't really abandoned, right? Um, and another thing to add to that is without the feeling of abandonment, without the need to forget, you really can't experience life on earth as well as you think you would.
Yeah.
Right, if you don't want to go through that experience, you might as well just stay with consciousness back where you are. Or this may sound crazy, but incarnate on a different planet where you always remember your eternal connection to everything.
Yeah. I think it's a really fascinating answer to a question I think a lot of us have. I have, why do we have to have all these fears? Why do we only grow through hard times? Why do we, but I think about, and it's interesting because you and I both have the same common background. You call him Master Jesus now. I grew up with Jesus and I still am a big admirer of Jesus, but Jesus had to go through the same thing that you can't be human with that feeling. That so when I was growing up, I always had this idea of Jesus just always knew that he was God, and Jesus was never really disconnected from the source, or never felt disconnected from the source, because none of us really ever are. But that wouldn't make him fully human. So when he was on the cross, and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? That to me shows his humanity, and I think that's a very important aspect. That was just my personal side about Jesus, but I wanted to get that in. But like I said, I read that in your book, and that was right in the beginning. I'm like, yeah, that's it. I've never heard anybody talk about this feeling of abandonment before, and the feeling and the thing that fear and abandonment are a necessary part of being human. It's part of the experience.
Yes, and it takes a whole lot of bravery to do this, right? I mean, I in the moment I remembered, that's one of the things I'll never, ever, ever forget going forward, is in looking at everybody and appreciating just what you signed up for, right? You're currently experiencing life in a superbly designed environment. I mean, think about the finesse it takes to create an illusionary reality that you think as you're in it is real. As you're in it, you're all alone. As you're in it, you at the same time, you don't remember your eternal connection to everything. But at the same time, you're always connected.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, all this stuff that you're doing and all the lessons that you're learning are helping you expand knowledge of yourself. And because you are this eternally connected being and you are basically consciousness, it's helping consciousness expand its consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. And I don't know where else in the planet or where else in the cosmos people are experiencing life like we do. Pain, fear, death, suffering, joys, all of that, which they seem so real, my friend. I mean,
Yeah.
you know this. You
Yeah.
you've experienced one of the worst, the
Mm-hmm.
loss of a child.
Mm-hmm.
And when I hear your story as well, I feel the same. I go, man, what a story. Think about the soul agreements that you had. This is me, right? When I see you, this is how I see the world now. I'm just in awe of the soul agreements that your daughter had with you and your
Mm-hmm.
wife, and how she would come and exit at some point, and it would be teaching you, right, the ultimate lesson, which we all know it. um and how much you'd have to overcome that, like through what looks like a, an eternal pain, but
Mm-hmm.
because time's not really real either, right? You know that eventually that's where we're all headed, is remembering this truth about who we are, so that which then makes all our lessons learned just fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, you talk about a couple of the rules that we have in as beings, right? You said that for every, and that this is a, I guess, a universal rule for every action is the equal and opposite reaction, and there will always have free will, but we're always unconditionally loved as well. Let's talk about unconditional love and what that really means, because I think a lot of people, we talk about love, but for most of us, love is conditional. So, what is unconditional love?
So, through my experience, again, I can only speak from my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Unconditional love is basically that. It's the fact that because you are self aware, because you are aware, you are unconditionally loved. Like you, this sounds crazy. And I've had a lot of people tell me that it was actually pretty irresponsible to put this in my book. And I even struggled with it too. But I couldn't alter it because it's exactly what I remembered. Because you are as you are right now, in every moment, you are unconditionally loved. Like you can literally do no wrong because there is nothing else except this oneness. And everything you're doing, specifically in this environment, is designed to be simultaneously both. Like you can't isolate, from what I understand, you can't isolate good from bad. And that sounds very, 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 it may sound ridiculous, but if you look back at your life and all the experiences you've had, if you expand your consciousness a lot more on all those experiences, you can appreciate that there's a way to kind of turn it into something bad or something good.
Yeah.
But because everything is of consciousness and everything is consciousness on this planet, it's always balanced. And so it's simultaneously both.
Mm-hmm.
And so unconditional love says, go out and do. While you're doing, you're teaching all of us how infinitely creative, the myriad emotions that we can experience. You're showing us the ways to experience that. You're teaching us to build on your creativity to do other things. And because you're doing this, and we thank you for it, the only way we can thank you is to love you immensely, regardless of what you do, because again of the environment that you're in. In
Yeah.
this environment, you can't isolate either one. And so, whether you incarnate here or somewhere else, the roles that you're playing, which are your roles, the ones you choose, how you choose to act, they're supporting the same sort of, they're supporting the same outcomes. all of us are learning more about how infinitely creative we are. All of us are learning to experience an infinite array of emotions.
Yeah.
And with that, we're knowing more and more of who we truly are. So
Well,
to
let's
me, that's, yeah, that encapsulates unconditional love. Sorry,
l- l-
Brian.
let's play a little thought game, because you played this in your book, and you said that the consciousness or source doesn't really care about how we do stuff as long as we're authentic. And you get a really extreme example. If I need to get ice for the Super Bowl, I go out and I can go buy the ice and be nice to the clerk and everything, or I could go out, and this is disturbing to even say, I could kill the clerk and bring the ice home. And either way, I got the ice home. And so, from that higher perspective, that consciousness doesn't care. Now, I would push back on that a little bit, because I know you didn't really mean that people should go out and kill each other, because
Absolutely not.
on this planet, I believe, and I'm just set this out there, and you can respond to it, that there's a set of rules, that there are some things that we can do that are desirable and not and undesirable, and we can choose love or we can choose fear. And so, if I did do that thing, it's got really consequences for me here and for all the other souls that I touch. So these things, I think, can both be true simultaneously. On one level, this is all a simulation. It's all a game. When the game's over, it turns off. We're all back home in our beds, right? But on the other level, the things we do here, we are supposed to choose love over fear. So how would you respond to that?
No, valid point, Brian. So the best way to respond, again, and I like that you said, is if anyone knows me, they know I am one of the least. I'm so apprehensive to violence, right? Like
Mm-hmm. I
so
believe
much
that.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
that, yeah. I mean, I don't want any of that to happen. But it was part of my check engine light,
Mm-hmm.
where in trying to justify or in trying to make sense and control how people should act with each other, I found out that if I pushed really hard and tried to dictate what people did, then there was a chance that I would end up becoming that which I thought shouldn't happen,
Yeah.
under the pretense of preventing that which I think shouldn't happen. I looked at the history of the planet coming from Africa. You look at slavery, you look at all the world wars, and I began to really think, if there is, I questioned as well, if there is a God, why is there so much violence?
Mm-hmm.
Why is there so much hatred?
Mm-hmm.
All of this. And then I tried to reconcile that with unconditional love. But before my awakening, the one thing I was doing was putting conditions to it. And the condition was, if you're going to do something, this is how you should do it, because it resonates with me as an expression of love.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't want to say unconditional love, because if I said this is how you should do it, then I was literally putting conditions to what
Yeah.
has no conditions.
Yeah.
And I looked at at even, I mean, just everything in the world. And I started to ask, but how am I contributing to what I'm saying isn't right? And I looked at the progression of people's lives with anything, and I went really extreme in the book so that people could really think about this, right? I
Mm-hmm.
used death, and I said, well, there is one way to come into this planet, and that's being born by a woman. And then there's another way to exit this planet, and that's through death. We can now go into the nuances, which I call justifications in the book, of how you should experience both. And based off of our conditionings, we're going to say, this is the right way to be born, and this is the right way to die.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, I saw, or I remember, that I was severely limiting how consciousness can experience itself, and also dictating other souls' lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And your lessons are so complicated and so mired in your past lives, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I recognized or remembered that this place wasn't really real, and you've spoken to many people who have had NDE experiences, and their stories are fascinating. I love them. But when you remember that death isn't really the end, coupling that with unconditional love understanding the earth life environment, it that's when things kind of made sense for me.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also go deep into the nuances and see that we actually indirectly support violence in everything we do, but because it's channeled in a certain way, we think it's okay. If it's channeled through laws that we all agree on, all of a sudden we think it's okay. If it's channeled through the army going to war to
Mm.
protect us under the name of protecting us, all of a sudden we think it's okay.
Yeah.
Mind you, if it's channeled through an animal that we're killing to eat, all of a sudden we think it's okay. But there was this one beautiful story, and I'm going to paraphrase it yet, that I heard Sadhguru talk about. And it had to do something along the lines of this this man is talking to a wise sage who is kind of like in an enlightened state. And the man's questioning how much power we as humans have here on earth. And the wise sage says, you have a lot of power in your spoken word. And he says, are you kidding? So if I command something, that will be done? He says, yes, give it a try. And it seemed like there was a caterpillar that walked by or something, and he commanded that caterpillar to die. The man did, and the caterpillar died.
Hmm.
And then right after that, a butterfly came through, and he commanded that caterpillar, that butterfly to die, and the butterfly did. And then like a squirrel came through or something of that sort. He
Mm-hmm.
commanded that squirrel to die, and the squirrel did. And the man is like, my goodness, I have this much power. And the sage is like, yes, you do. And then an antelope walks by, and the man commands the antelope to die. And the antelope falls dead. Bam. And then this woman walks by with a baby, right? And the sage says, there you go. Command this baby to die. And the man says, whoa, whoa, whoa. Now you're pushing it too far. I'm not going to do this. And the baby said, hey, listen, I was a caterpillar. You commanded me to die. I expanded my consciousness. I was a butterfly. Then I was a squirrel. Then I was an antelope. Now you are preventing me from experiencing enlightenment. My freedom has come. Your commandment would allow me to experience that. And you hold back? How dare you? And so in that thinking, when you step back and you look at it from the perspective of consciousness, and you ask, I call consciousness God, and you ask, why would we come here and have all these experiences? Why would he allow this to happen? If not for the mere fact that it's helping us learn more about ourselves.
Hmm.
And so if the consciousness, if this being is unconditionally loving, like we all say, where do those conditions end? Where do they end?
Yeah.
And that was the push, is where does it end? Now, you can, in your own judgment, don't do that. I don't condone it. And I say it, I try to say in the book, hey, please don't do this. But then again, I recognize somebody has to learn some lesson. And so I'm not saying it's okay. And I really hate to say that too. But I get it. I appreciate that life on earth is a place where we can't really isolate. And when we try to dictate too much what conditions evoked unconditional love, then we're likely to end up being what we're saying we shouldn't have.
I think it's a fascinating thought experiment that we all need to kind of play out ourselves. And I like that you were brave enough to push that, in your book. And it reminds me, I was speaking with a client just a few days ago who thinks that this person committed the unforgivable sin. And I'm talking to this person, they're like, I feel separated from my source. I feel separated from myself. I can't pray. I can't meditate. I'm just cut off because of this thing that I did. And I had to say, the thing that you did was wrong because it harmed other people. So I have to say, I think there are things that we can do that are wrong. But from the perspective of consciousness, from the perspective of our core, or of our source, our creator, there is nothing that we could do that's wrong that would ever cut us off from that. And I think that's the very important lesson in the example that you gave. Not that we should go out and kill people to get ice, but that nothing that we can do nothing that we can do can separate us from the love of our God, from the love of ourself, from our source. But we can put ourselves in hell, and people, when we die, we do have near-death experiences. And people have had some very hellish near-death experiences because they've judged themselves. They've realized that I'm supposed to choose love over fear. There is a desirable outcome. There is a desire to choose love, but sometimes choosing fear teaches us as well. I mean, not sometimes, all the time. Everything that we do works out for the greater good. And it's a hard concept for people to hold both those things in their minds at the same time, I think. And I appreciate you exploring that.
Yeah, Brian, it really is. And those were so many of the check engine lights that came on for me, right? You can look at history of mankind on this planet. You can look at the oppressions that the minorities have faced, right, over time. And question is, if speaking like someone like from Africa, for instance, and I thought, well, slavery was a big part of our history. But look at where we are now as a continent, as a country, specifically in Cameroon. We're nowhere where like an advanced country or developed country like America is. And it was a country that was, sort of developed on all this, this what you would call free labor, essentially, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I said today, if I try to develop Cameroon, it's not going to be free labor. It'll be way expensive. And then at the same time, I asked, but why would this happen? Why would anybody who calls themselves unconditional loving allow this to happen? And then today, we're still in a situation where Cameroon is nowhere developed. We're having sort of different problems there. How do I reconcile this? And it wasn't with my rational mind. I couldn't. You really have to elevate beyond the illusion of duality and look at this not from like a 30-foot level, but from like a 30,000-mile level, right, where you're looking down at this thing at play. And another thing that also made me make sense of this was the fact or the idea or the remembrance that on this planet, for me to learn how to love or to overcome a fear, if I created that fear in my mind, somebody had to bring it to life for me. And those are the roles that we play for each other. And a very good example would be in the movies we watch, for instance, right? And that's another fascinating thing is after an awakening, you begin to see this truths at play everywhere in all of Earth life. So when we watch movies, especially action movies, there's always a hero and a villain. And our favorite action movies are the ones where the villain is so well developed, right, that they challenge that hero to push and push and push and push.
Yeah.
And we can think back and say, well, if the villain wasn't very well developed, then the hero is like, okay, well, that was not a good movie. What he had to overcome wasn't trying enough.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is, just like life on Earth, you need people to audition to play both roles. I need somebody to play that other role for me to learn my lesson, to give me the opportunity to choose love. And I quickly learned that even I, in my quote unquote doings of everything that I thought was loving, oh boy, little did I know that I was doing everything in this love, but other people were also perceiving it as the entire opposite. I could not have learned this any more so than looking at my life in the past before my awakening and even afterwards, especially as pharmacy director, right? And it's not as extreme as going to kill somebody. Again, I am so against that. But even as pharmacy director, I was doing everything that I thought was loving. But the feedback you get is, boy, Roland, why would you do that? That's awful, right? Yeah.
You gave a great example in the book of Jesus, for example. Now I hear people talk about Jesus. They talk about Martin Luther King, and they say we should be more like them, because they were loving and peaceful. And I remind people, both of them were murdered, so they were not seen as perfect people by everybody. And those people's eyes, they were playing that contrast role. And I don't know if you want to share the story you told about Jesus and the I'll let you tell it if you like.
Sure. Again, I try to find extremes again to show just what it means to incarnate on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is a perfect example. And you can use anybody that we currently revere today, anyone that we look up to as someone who has shaped either pop culture or shaped spiritual culture, etc., on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought with Jesus Christ, he's this ultimate being. He remembered entirely who he was and he embodied that here on this planet to a degree that I don't want to say we've never seen, but to a degree that over 2,000 years later, we're still invoking his presence,
Yeah.
right? As this teacher that touched all our lives. And I say, think about this from the other side, right? And this was just years of meditating. Is he was here on this planet with all of us, showing us exactly how to achieve what we're beating our heads for, searching every day.
Mm-hmm.
And what did we say in our genius? Boy, take a hike.
Mm-hmm.
Take a hike with your message. It doesn't resonate with us. I mean, how can we make sense of that? But then it gets better is after we do this, right? And I say we, and I say we just because it's we as humans. We
It's
did this.
it's
We did
us.
this to
We
this
did it.
man, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So after we do this, we start to feel guilty because we're on planet Earth where nothing is isolated. Think about if you were in that moment, all the justifications you made for yourself that said killing this man will bring us peace. Again, you're looking for that peace outside of you. You're thinking what you do to somebody else will bring you peace. My friend, no. We killed him. And not in just any way. We hung him on the cross with other people who, by the laws of their time, were guilty. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We killed him in front of his mom and his aunts and his like just the most vile way we hung this man on a cross. We're done. And then a little bit later, we start to feel guilty. Oh my goodness, what did we do? We shouldn't have killed this man. And then we say, guess what? Everything he was teaching us was what we needed to learn. So let's create all these churches. Let's create this religion that says his way is the only way and the right way. And so in our geniusness, we now go on crusades, killing everybody
Yeah.
who disagrees again, right? And I'm saying, but where else can you have such an experience except on planet Earth?
Yeah.
So we go around killing people, spreading his word. Hey, you need to be saved by believing in this being. If you don't, we kill you. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Think with your rational mind what kind of sense that makes. It doesn't.
Right.
And it doesn't stop there. And then after we're killing all these people, we're still not saved. And we're still pushing. And tens of thousands of years later, we're still fighting. And we're arguing. We're saying this is the only way. And then people break off. And then you have different Christian teachings, Baptists, Pentecostals, Orthodox, all of this. You have, I mean, you could look at the history and just see how much has come out of this man's life. And we're still searching. And so I asked, but think about how much good has come out of this. How much people's lives have changed when they've come in contact with this being. And how much that change has said, oh, there is way more to Christianity and the teachings that people recognize,
Mm-hmm.
which is where I am today. Is these teachings are fascinating. They're great. They're a stepping stone. They're legitimate. There's a lot of truth in them. But that truth cannot be identified or resonated with the rational mind alone.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go beyond. Right? Yeah.
I love the way you put that. That was brilliant. And I was talking with someone yesterday about religion and spirituality, and they were saying how we see some people right now. I don't like to get political, but people on the right they're really becoming very religious, and they're like, this is the way to be a right-minded person. And I was saying, religion, I believe, is a stepping stone. But religion will not take us to where we need to be. Religion can maybe move it. So I still have the same reference for you that you do for Jesus and for the Bible. I think there's some great stuff in there, but I think we need to move beyond that. And I love the way you talked about, the way that Jesus was perceived, because after people died, again, I bring up MLK, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for years because he was considered a terrorist. You know, he was the bad guy. He was the antagonist in that story. He wasn't the protagonist. It's years later we look back and say, yeah, that was a good guy. You know, Martin Luther King. We got to remember the guy was murdered for his beliefs, and we tried to stand up for. So there's two sides to everything that we do. I think that's the point you make in the book. I think you do a great job with it. I also want to talk to you.
Thanks,
I
Brian.
want to talk about this idea because we use the word illusion a lot of times, and I use the word dream. I use the analogy a lot of times that this is like virtual reality. This is like we're like in a very immersive video game, and we're all really safe. Yeah. But it's also very real, Mm-hmm. And when we talk about the ego, we talk about the ego as a construct, which I fully believe. But some people make the ego the enemy. And they're like, I need to get rid of my ego. And my take on it is if you get rid of your ego, you will die because you can't live on this planet without an ego. So I want to ask you about the concept of ego death. And what do you think about that? Is it possible? Or what should our goal be?
Oh, that's another fascinating question. And at the beginning of the book, just to make this point is I do acknowledge the complexities and the challenge of using words to sort of explain these truths and these universal truths that I remembered. But the ego I love. Now, before my awakening, Brian, I was in the same boat. I wanted to get rid of the ego, right? The ego is awful. It's making me think bad things. It's making me do this and do that. It's making me this evil person. Evil ego, right? But no. After my awakening, I gained an entire new perspective of what the ego is. I love your analogies of video games, right? And I'm going to use that to kind of explain how I understand the ego today. So in order to play a video game, in my book, I use Super Mario Brothers, but you could literally replace with anyone. You have to pick a character in that world in order to experience life in that world, right? And so in Super Mario Brothers, you can pick Mario or Luigi, for instance. Now, Mario and Luigi are egos in the world Super Mario Brothers. Now, your true self, which is really not your true self, but for the sake of this analogy, your true self now becomes I, Roland, who's playing the game. I cannot physically become a character embodying my full self in that world. And think about it. If I was, a lot of my biological processes won't work. I won't be able to feel emotions the way I currently do. I won't be able to pee, poop, eat, fried chicken, baked beans, any of that stuff.
Right.
I won't be able to in the world Super Mario Brothers. It's a confined world with certain characteristics, rules, regulations, and limitations. On our planet, what I understand or what I remembered was in order to experience life here, you have to have an avatar as well. And that avatar is your ego, essentially. So Roland Achenjang is my ego with all my fears, with all my beliefs, with what I currently remember as who I truly am and what my level of connection or my level of connection to consciousness that I'm in. I use that in the book, which is how much do you remember of who you truly are, makes up my ego. Now, ego death, right, happens all the time. It's not a one-time thing. It happens regularly. And that happens when your beliefs are challenged to the point where you're kind of forced to change. So in our previous conversation, an example of ego death that I eventually realized, but that I was fighting to let go, was the idea that Jesus Christ had siblings born of Mary. So that belief system being challenged, me holding on to, is an egoic construct that I'm fighting with. It's not really real. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Okay, now I could believe and hold on to it, but if I do, that's creating my ego. What the ego does, besides allow you to experience life on earth, is allows you to identify fears and also to create within your construct, within your framework, within your environment, ideas or ways in which to overcome those fears. Now, after a spiritual awakening like I did, a bunch of my ego, my old ego, died. But because I am still on this planet, I have to create a new one. Like you can't live here without. And so my new ego is now Roland, the author, who is talking about my new understanding of my connection to consciousness
Mm-hmm.
and spreading the word. But this is not who I was before my awakening. Now,
Yeah.
many of my beliefs have changed, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we need the ego. It's not bad. Again, remember, you can literally do no wrong. With your ego, you're still helping all of consciousness experience life in ways that it could not ever do without you,
Yeah.
right? Your uniqueness through your ego, it's exactly what consciousness wants you to express.
Yeah, I love the way you put that. I think that was really great. And when you were saying, I got the idea of rebirth, right? The ego dies, but then it's reborn like a phoenix. It keeps rising, but in a different form.
In a
So
different
we
form.
can we can we can no longer be the person when we were, but we still need to take on a new avatar. So we're like leveling up. Maybe that would be another way of putting it in the video game analogy.
Oh
That
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I love that. And one of the good ones is like Dragon Ball Z. I mean, I kid you not. I look at all of life now, and all I see are these universal truths everywhere. So the
Hmm.
idea of leveling up is like Dragon Ball Z. His ego just kept growing, Super Saiyan mode, and all this. That's it. We're all leveling up. You're gaining new skills and new abilities, and then when you use that now to express yourself, you're still not going to avoid, right, the illusion of right and wrong. You can't. I mean, you can't. And
Right.
so in everything that I'm doing, someone's going to perceive it as the other side. But the more your ego develops, the more you are in alignment with this consciousness and you remember this, you recognize that it's part of the earth life game, and then you're not afraid to like move forward, knowing that both are lessons. And then you're not judging. When someone says what you're doing is wrong, you get it, and you kind of smile. You're like, I get it, it's wrong. And then you maybe get to a place where you can both work. You be clear about your message, but you also understand that you're on planet earth, and it's limited in how much you can communicate effectively with somebody else,
Hmm.
and it's also limited in how much you can isolate your own made up ideas of good or bad, right or wrong. And then it kind of makes it, what do I say? I use the word bliss. You feel a little more relaxed. You know that you can always return to consciousness because you're always connected, and you keep going. You show up.
Yeah, I think that analogy really works well, and you can say it makes you more relaxed. I had this friend. Every time I think about this, I think about my friend I argued with many years ago, where he called it ontological levels. I think it was. So from one perspective, one level, something might be wrong, but from another level, it's not wrong. But we're in here, like the video game is a great example. There are rules in the video game. There's certain things you can't do, and there's a goal in the video game. There's something you're trying to accomplish in the game. Now, outside the game, as Roland or Brian playing the game, we realized that when I turn the game off, it doesn't really matter. I was just playing a game. But so there's always two sides to this. And you were speaking of the ego, and in the book, you give Satan a lot of time in the book. And I know that's probably going to bother some people.
It
So I'm
will.
going to talk about what your perception of Satan is, and why you give Satan so much time, and why you have a chapter titled "Satan is your best friend."
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Satan, the devil is your best friend. I believe that's chapter 8, 7 or 8. So, well, if you look at my upbringing again, right, it had basically prepared me to label Satan as the enemy of progress,
Hmm.
anybody's progress, right? Satan is this, my goodness, you, anything that you did that you didn't like, anything that you experienced that was bad, Satan was at will to this. But after my awakening, I began to recognize, or I remembered that again on planet Earth, you cannot isolate either one. And in my analogy of using the word Satan, that's me building on the idea of duality. Like if you
Hmm.
think of duality as good and bad, then the ultimate representations of each, and this is me assuming that most people are like me, was anything that was so good it was almost heavenly was godlike.
Hmm.
Everything that was so bad that it was almost hellish was of Satan. Like Satan's, you're involved with this, right? And so in experiencing life, and I have this rose-colored view of life. I always had this even before my awakening. I would go through these experiences, and a friend of mine or I would have similar experiences, but we would then categorize them to different degrees of either hellish, good, bad,
Mm-hmm.
or like really great. And I found that it could be really easy for me to say, I lost a basketball game, and that was so hellish. Satan did that. Or
Yeah.
I won a basketball game, and that was of God's doing. I mean, you watch award shows, you watch sports,
Mm-hmm.
the Packers beat the Patriots or something, and then at the end they're like, God's with us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, but wait a minute. Again, this is my red flags. My rational mind is like, this don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling me that all these people, the entire team, all 53 players on a team that you just played and beat, prepared all week with your coach, and then they came and lost because God was not with them. It's like, which God are you talking about? So I
Mm-hmm.
had all these questions. And then after the awakening, I recognized that we are the constructs of both. The God we believe in is entirely a representation of our current level of awareness of our connection to consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that we are all one, right? And I saw this. Everything is the same thing. It's it's one. It's what I call consciousness. If you are, if you can think it, if it exists, it is this consciousness expressed as expressed in a unique way. And so I saw that every unique thing that was being expressed again was simultaneously both on this planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I liked it, it was good. If I didn't like it, it was bad. And it even went down to like mundane things like food. I'd be eating food with a friend, like, oh, that's gross, that's disgusting. Why would you eat that? And then I'm like, dude, this is good. Like, how do I make sense of this?
Yeah.
And what I saw was every time something happened that we didn't like, and we kind of chucked it up to Satan, and it would be a similar experience. That's when our ego was sort of playing the game to say, hey, how can you overcome this fear? So every fear we were identifying and creating, our made up Satan was bringing it to life for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I say he's your best friend because if he wasn't, he would keep you away from that fear, and then you will be limited in your growth and ability to express creativity.
Yeah.
And every time you've overcome a fear, think about who brought that fear to life for you. And that's what I'm trying to say. That's the role Satan is playing for you. And when you remember that, it becomes like your most challenging coach you've ever had or your favorite teacher, the person who pushed you to be your best, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
person who showed you that, the person who, think about this. Most people who end up achieving what we call earth life success will always thank and mention somebody who doubted them.
Mm-hmm.
But this is to, you hear this a lot in pop culture music. This is to my teachers who said I would never make it.
Yeah.
And when I hear that,
Yeah.
I just laugh.
Yeah.
I go, boy, that's your Satan. That's the
Yeah.
person who motivated you to push. That's your Satan. And you're thanking him. You don't even recognize it. And you think he was against you. He saw that potential, if you want to think about it this way. Or your Satan, which was basically you, saw that potential in yourself, brought it to life for you because it was a fear. I think I can be a great artist. Nah, you can't. That's Satan talking to you back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody comes out and brings it to life for you, other than in your mind. Roland, you will never be a great artist. Dude, I did this. Sorry to call you dude. That's not appropriate. Brian,
Mm-hmm.
I did this to myself before I wrote my book.
Sure.
Man, my Satan came out. You can't write a book. You're never going to be published.
Mm-hmm.
What the heck? But I realized what he was doing immediately. It's like, I just had this awakening. I know what this is. These are my fears coming to life.
Mm-hmm.
And Satan is bringing it to life for me. Thank you. Now let's work together. How can I overcome this? You can write a book.
You said something in the book that I hadn't really heard put this way before, and I loved it. You talked about how our fears actually help us to prepare to do better, to do things we need to do to accomplish it. So when you said I wanted to be an author, and you had the fear I can't do this, then you're like, well, what are all the things I need to do to do this? What are the things I need to accomplish? And if you hadn't had that fear, you wouldn't have gone through that. And as I was reading that, I was relating to myself personally. I've always had this problem with like money, for example. I've always had a fear of not having enough money. And I just met with my financial planner like a week or so ago, and we were going over our finances. And I realized because I've had that fear for as long as I have, and when I was making, good money like I did in the past, I was saving and everything. He's like, you're actually in a pretty good position now. And I'm like, wow, I finally feel a little bit relaxed about this. But it's because I've had this fear since I was 16 years old that I put myself into that position. So I said, I read your book and I'm like, okay, now I get it. I mean, that really resonated with me a lot.
No, I appreciate it. And I thank you for sharing that story, but it's true. And I see, I mean, again, when you go through an experience like this, it becomes literally who you are and it's all
Mm-hmm.
you see. So every time I interact with family members, I see this. But I shouldn't say the beauty, the challenge or the interesting thing about all of this is you can read my book like you did and then apply it to your life. And you're aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have that experience, it's an entirely different thing. It's now a knowing, right? And every great teacher, I think that's one of the gaps between personal experience and then like awareness through knowing or exposure.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very big gap in trying to instill or make you really appreciate the idea of Satan in your life, right? It's not, yes, I'm not saying don't think of it as something bad if you currently do it. That's fine. But if you want to expand your consciousness, you have to ask. But then, why is it that in everything I do, Satan seems to be involved? What is he really doing for me? He seems to be everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So one day I was traveling home and I missed my flight. It wasn't my fault, right? There's a delay, and I missed my connection flight. And my mom calls and she goes, "Oh, Roland, I'm sorry. God is in control." And I was like, "Wait, which God? Is it the same one that caused me to miss my flight?" I'm like, "No, it's the." If you, in her mind, she's thinking, she's probably thinking, I did something bad and I've missed my flight, maybe, or there's like Satan
Yeah.
involved, I missed my flight. It's just an opportunity to learn something. What can I do with this time? Can I meet someone at the airport and just have a conversation with? Can I take this time to meditate? Can I calm? If you start to become more aware, you start to see how the God you create and the Satan you create are literally working together to help you expand your consciousness all the time.
Yeah.
God brings your joys to life. Satan brings your fears to life. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as a coach, as a grief guide, when I'm working with people, my biggest thing with people is getting them to change their perspective, to how they look at things, because everything that happens is good and bad, or neither good nor bad, or however you choose to look at it. And I always tell the stories. One of my favorite stories is a Taoist story where this guy says, is a farmer and his son goes out and finds a wild horse. And the villagers all come to him and say, oh, it's a great thing your son found a horse. He says, well, maybe. And then the next day the son falls, he's trying to break the horse and he falls and he breaks his leg. And the villagers all come to him and they said, it's so bad. It's too bad your son broke his leg. He says, well, maybe. And then the next day the army comes through and they're conscripting people in the army, and they don't take the son because he's broken his leg. And they say, well, it's a great thing that your son broke his leg. And the farmer says, maybe. And this is all of our lives. We always want to judge things good or bad. And I deal with people that have been through traumas. I've been through trauma. That's why my daughter's in the picture behind me. But if my daughter hadn't passed, when she did, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. And we all have awakenings in different ways at different times. So when I talk to people like you and I say, oh man, I kind of wish I had the experience that Roland had, where I could get these crazy things in meditation and I would just know it. But that's not my path. That's not my experience. My path is different. But reading your book and listening to your story, and I appreciate you sharing so much of your time with me, can really inspire all of us to look at like, what's my path and how do I get to this place while I'm still in the body? Because like you said, the good thing is we're all going to get there one way or the other.
Yes, Brian. No, thank you. That's a fascinating story too. I love it. It just shows the uniqueness and the different paths in which we're taking to basically end up in the same place.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to not take up too much more of your time. I want to ask you one last thing. So we're living these bodies, we're living this life that's kind of an illusion, whatever. What happens to us when we die? What happens to Roland or to Brian? What can we expect? What can we expect?
Well, it varies, right? And for someone like you who has had multiple conversations with folks who have had near-death experiences, you can appreciate this. And I would encourage anybody listening to, continue listening to your podcast to get an idea of what these experiences are like, or even, visit any websites that catalog some of these stories that are told. IANDS is a really good place to get in contact with or learn a lot about what happens when we pass. There are a couple of underlying things that I remembered. One, and the really big one, is when you pass, right? You embody more of who you truly are, basically all of who you truly are, and that's this infinite being. And then you're slowly then received back on the other side, which is, if you can appreciate it, you're being birthed back into that world. Just like when you come into this world, you're being birthed here, and usually you have people receiving you. If you're in a hospital, you got the doctor and the nurses, you're sort of crying, you're discombobulated, I don't know the right word.
Hmm.
And then people kind of help bring you in slowly and help you assimilate into this new reality that you're experiencing, which is way different in certain regards than where you were before. And so when you pass here, you're being birthed back into that other world. And usually you're going to have some sort of people, family members, close soul guides and soul tribe members of yours, maybe even your teachers, etc., receive you into that world, including people who had played different roles in your life that had crossed over before you. And then when they receive you, they help assimilate you back into that world. Uh, and then from there, over time, I don't really want to say time here, but
Hmm.
you go through a review with your guide or with other teachers, and you are basically kind of like the one reviewing your life, right, with the help of these people. They're asking you questions. Hey, how do you think you did in this scenario, in this case? And based off of your answers, right, you're basically showing how much you've grown as a soul, how much you've evolved, how much your consciousness has expanded. And then after a while, there's really no perception of time there. After you've rested and sort of come back to yourself, you can choose to come back. But a big piece that I remembered is all of life is, in a crude way, is information that's being kept, that can be accessed in myriad ways,
Mm.
right? Upon exiting the physical body. Even in the physical body, if you train yourself well enough, you can access this information. Now, it also depends, I would say, I don't want to speak for everybody, but if you chose to incarnate in a way that you really weren't going to access this information, then that might not be available to you. But on the other side, all this information is available. You can access, you can review, you can learn. There's a big piece about learning that never seems to end as a self-aware being. You're
Hmm.
always learning. And so when you go back to the other side, everything you're doing is continuing to learn. And all that learning is feeding back consciousness, which is this all. And all that, imagine if everything you were doing was basically being fed to one source. And that's the idea, I think, of source knowing everything. So all you're learning is feeding back into this source. Whether you're studying, you're reviewing your life, you're asking how you could have done things better, you're asking for advice from older souls, traveling to different places where you can experience life in different ways, you're ceaselessly learning. And we do that on this planet. If you appreciate that every experience you have is teaching you something, right? And then from there, I think you're speeding up your consciousness expansion piece. And so I discussed that in my book, and the
Hmm.
ability to review your life from multiple perspectives. But a great book that I read after I actually released my book was The Journey of Souls.
Oh,
That's an
yes,
amazing
yes.
book, right?
Yeah.
That book it's super fascinating what Michael Newton was able to document with his work of helping human beings, right, go back to their lives between lives. And it's a very, 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 very well written book about what happens to you when you pass. Um, Now, this I have not had a near death experience, right? I've had my spiritual awakening experience, and then
Hmm.
another other experience that I don't talk about in the book, where I was able to sort of see a glimpse of what happens where we pass. But a very good place to go to would be any NDE stories,
Yeah.
and you'll see that you're not really gonna go anywhere. Um, and just another food for thought is believe, or like I remember that everything is this consciousness. There is nothing outside of it. So even when we pass, regardless of where we end, it's still a construct of consciousness. So like you can't really go outside of it somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? And if you're in any constructed environment that is of conscious, know that you are learning something there. And soon enough, you will have to go to some other place to continue to learn. Um, and that was something that I when I had my awakening and I remembered a lot of this stuff, kind of made me also feel like, oh well, yeah, okay, if you do go to hell, it's a constructed environment, there's something to learn there.
Hmm.
Eventually you're going to go to heaven. But if you realize most people who go there aren't there forever, they leave, they come back here, they go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap things up. I do want to tell everybody again, the name of the book is "Who and Why You Are: All You Need to Remember" by Roland Achenjang, Achenjang, and that's his website also, rolandachenjang.com. I encourage people. You can tell if you listen to this podcast, Roland's a great conversationalist, so I encourage you to check out his podcast, Conversations with Roland. I know you've had some great guests on. I know you're getting more great guests. So, just to wrap it up, anything you'd like to say before we close?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. And then secondly, if anything, please know in your heart that you are this infinitely brave soul having a temporary experience here on earth, designed purposefully to teach you just how infinitely creative you are, infinitely brave you are. And in everything you're doing, in everything you're saying, in everything you're thinking, in everything you're wishing for, you're helping all of us remember the same information about who we are. And then you're helping consciousness, which is the all, learn more about itself. Right. And so don't for once like look down upon yourself and your uniqueness. Please don't. Um, your your contribution is your uniqueness, and if you can embody that, you're doing all of us a great service, like all of us.
Yeah.
So
Wow. That
yeah.
was great. That was well said. Roland, thank you for being with me today. Thank you for spending so much time and doing this. Looking forward to getting the feedback on this episode, and I'm looking forward to listening to your podcast as well.
Likewise, Brian, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Thank
You
you.
have a good one.